Hey, everybody, and welcome to Searching for Ghosts on YouTube. This is the revisited series, The Disappearance of Cayce Lynn McDaniel. This is Ep.5, The Elephant in the Room. We put out this PSA. I've been contacted by some people, and I think there's some confusion. They're finding us for the first time on YouTube. The Disappearance of Cayce Lynn McDaniel, Searching for Ghosts, Season 1, is 5 years old. It is already out. It's about 17 episodes anywhere you listen to audio podcasts. So Spotify, Apple, Google Play, Amazon, iHeartRadio, wherever we've got this thing pretty much on all the major podcast platforms. So if you want to, go and check that out, I'm not actively investigating this thing anymore. This is in law enforcement's hands. There has been an arrest made. We're waiting on the justice system to do their thing, right? So we will obviously pick this back up and report on any further developments. But as far as I'm not actively pursuing. This is me just revisiting this stuff 5 years later and kind of giving commentary on it with 5 years to kind of think about it, and try to talk about the mistakes I've made or the things that might have been done right or whatever. So yeah, the podcast is out. The investigation on my end is for all intents and purposes, done. This is just a revisiting. Okay. Let's listen to this first clip, and I've got a little bit to talk about it. Previously on Searching for Ghosts.
Was Cayce going through the teenage rebellion stage that so many have denied? There seemed to be a pattern of adult men showing interest in the underage Cayce. This is unsettling at best. This type of thing sets up a scenario that could easily lead to a motive to do harm to Cayce. Do these things have anything to do with Cayce's disappearance? Is the letter real? Was this the doing of a delusional older man who felt that God was speaking to him in this manner?
A child like that, it just don't disappear. It just, not the child like she was, because she was a good Christian child.
Right.
With the background and everything. You just don't run away. She had no reason to run away.
I feel like, which we had never done this before, because we're only 14. That's something that probably comes when you're 17.
Right.
Hey, tell your mom I'm with you, but I'm really going out with this guy. We really hadn't gotten to that stage of being wild teenagers yet.
When I first started digging into this story in November of last year, I had no idea about any of the theories that have been floating around Milan for 20 years. But I immediately received some startling information from some classmates of Cayce. I knew nothing about Cindy being the focus of this investigation, either officially, unofficially, or in the court of public opinion. And I definitely didn't know about some of the things that people were saying that Cayce herself was involved in. My fear of finding any truth in what Cayce's peers were saying caused me to drop this project at least 3 times. But aren't we after the truth? I always thought that being an outsider looking at this case was a benefit. I could be objective because I had limited dealings with the people of Milan. I don't play favorites. I didn't run around with anyone involved, so I have no misplaced loyalties. But once I started getting more and more information, I realized that if we were going to get to the truth, certain narratives that have been perpetuated for years were going to be destroyed by some carpetbagger musician. I was not going to be a very popular dude. That was kind of a super clip of, what I thought I knew at the time as far as Cayce. And but I had people from the start telling me, that she and Amber weren't even close anymore, that Cayce had this whole other set of friends. So the whole, Amber still saying 20 years later that, we weren't at the stage where we were sneaking out and doing this and that, chasing boys kind of thing, that only makes the abduction from the house case that much stronger. And I do want to say the whole shoes, nothing being missing, like her makeup or purse was there. None of her clothing. And I think that's why they said she was in a t-shirt and boxers, no shoes. It seems like I asked Hartsfield about that later, and I think it was just a process of elimination. I guess they had that, Cindy would have been the one to know, I guess, what clothes were, if any, were missing, And so it's not like that was off an eyewitness account. That was off, well, that's what she had to have been wearing or whatever. I don't know. But, when you look at that stuff and it's like, well, no, she wasn't sneaking around. Well, that lends itself to the abduction from the house thing. But then all this stuff was starting to come out in the Sun, and, the grandmother is quoted, Cindy's quoted. You got the guy she was talking to who was facing federal charges, who was 18, right? You got the letter thing. I mean, nothing was jiving as far as what I was being told, in the Cindy allegations, at least in the public sphere, not officially, were so strong, and it was just like that's what it had to be, and I'm in the process at this point still trying to get Cindy to talk to me. I want to hear her side of this, because she could clear a lot of this stuff up if there's nothing to it, right? And I was trying to, you kind of had multiple fronts on this thing, but you've got this whole thing where it's like, well, Cayce wasn't even seeing anybody, or didn't have, or she wasn't sneaking out looking for boys, going out with boys or whatever, and then all this stuff comes out in the media. And I think that's why the police had a really hard time trying to figure out if it was an abduction, a runaway situation, or some hybrid of the two, where she left with some dude and then couldn't get back, right? And I think that's kind of what they landed on, that latter one. But I feel their pain, man, because this was, you just couldn't get a straight answer. And I'm not saying everybody was lying, but it was just, you couldn't even get a beat on who her best friend was once I started looking into this. The de facto best friend has always been Amber. She's the one who kept the story alive for years. But one of the first things I heard was like, she was running around with all these other people, a wild group, and the grandmother says it in a Jackson Sun article. And so you're like, well, okay, well, which is it? I mean, like, was she sneaking around and doing teenage stuff, or was she sitting at home all the time? Because you're kind of being told both things, right? And the only purpose in that was to figure out if there was some other angle other than Cindy. Because Cindy was the main person that everybody kind of honed in on, Let's go to this next clip.
I even asked people involved in the media game what I should do about what I was hearing concerning both Cindy and Cayce. And what I was told disturbed me. Basically, I was advised that Cindy was fair game. Her name was already sullied. But these things about Cayce, well now, that was a bridge too far. But my fear was that the narrative that has been repeated over and over again was causing people to look at only one possible motive. The drug dad angle with Cindy, and one man in particular, is the prevailing theory in town. This is the story that I've been told so often that, quote, everyone knows, unquote. Well, I don't know that. I do know that some of the things that I've heard concerning people associated with Cayce, possibly without Cindy's knowledge, are just as plausible as the drug debt theory. And if we really want answers, if we really want the truth, that might mean that we uncover some things that we don't want to hear. And these things might not fit perfectly into our preconceived notions.
We can't have it both ways. The truth is no respecter of persons. The truth just is. I've been slammed because I haven't mentioned the one guy that everyone knows did it. For purposes of this podcast, we will call this man Mr. X. Well, for one, I'm going down the timeline with this, and we're not there yet. And I'll be damned if I'm going to go there prematurely when there are just as many plausible possibilities that are jumping out at me from the beginning. For example, the letter. If my sources are correct, this has nothing to do at all with Mr. X. That letter was so alarming that Cindy and others reportedly confronted the author on 2 separate occasions to get him to back off. It's been 21 years. Do people really think that Mr. X wasn't on law enforcement's radar? I know for a fact that he was. And what do we have to show for it 2 decades later? Nothing. Zero. Zilch. Nada. I'm not saying that Mr. X is innocent. I'm saying I don't know. Okay, so I kind of went into this in a previous thing, so I'm not going to go too deep on this aspect of trying to, I'm not going to get upset and defend myself of why people were telling me not to, that you couldn't mention those things because it would make Cayce look bad, kind of thing, right? And when people in the media, and I was trying to think of who that was that I asked that. It wasn't Brandon Schultz. He wasn't involved yet. I don't even know if he was over at the Sun. If he was, he was still in the sports, but he wasn't my guy over there who I ended up working with later. But anyway, it was just like, yeah, you can't mention it. You shouldn't mention any of that stuff about Cayce possibly seeing older guys or being involved. And I'm like, well, then how the hell are we supposed to, right? So it's just all about, so I guess we're all just going to dogpile on the Cindy aspect. And I was like, don't get me wrong, I'm looking at that too. She doesn't look good, but are we trying to find answers here, or are we trying to do a PR campaign? Because I don't really understand, So anyway, I kind of did it as delicately as I could in this episode, but I mean, it was all in the media, and all this stuff is public record, so it's not like, you know what I mean? It's not like I'm finally telling a deep dark secret, and and frankly, I was sick of stories, man. I was sick of storytelling of, of the image building of a certain thing just to kind of make things look a certain way, because that's not really helping the case, man. I was sick of the house story. I mean, I was so sick of it at this point. But like I said, there are some things like her clothes being there and stuff, and her shoes that, man, they give you pause. You have to. So it's not, again, I'm not dismissing any of this stuff, but it's just like some of these narratives that were being told didn't help the case as far as just me trying to connect dots, because that's all I'm trying to do, right? Obviously, I don't have access to all the stuff the police did, but you can connect dots from afar. That's just the thing. And this is the first time Mark Burns comes into play, Mr. X. Okay, in the beginning, I was not going to use anybody's real name because I had read enough on topics, and there were so many outlandish stories, and none of them connected in any way whatsoever. So you knew most of them are not true, right? And I don't care if they're criminals or not, or in the pen at the time or not. I was not going to use their names at first. Well, that stopped. Mark Burns was Mr. X, and Pete Hill was Mr. Y. It was going to be Mr. Y. But that was 80% of what was out there as far as theories was Mark Burns. And I wasn't ready to go there yet. I still had stuff to, starting with that night and working there, because the Cindy drug angle stories all tied into Mark Burns, right? So I knew that was going to be a mammoth undertaking when I got there. So my job was to kind of go slowly and look at everything before we got there. But people were already, I know who did it. I know who did it. It's Mark Burns, and Cindy was involved, and blah, 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 blah. And, and you start talking to him, you're like, oh, really? So, I mean, you were there, or somebody who's there, or you have some kind of corroborating evidence, that would, no, people just believed it, and they said they knew it, right? So I was already getting pressure to get on Mark Burns at this stage of the game, and I was just like, well, I'll get there when I get there, I'm looking at everything I can. Because that phone call, and I still don't know if that was true from the church, that had never been looked into, right? And maybe for good reason. Maybe there was nothing there. But again, I know I'm beating a dead horse. I held on to that, because if that were true and that wasn't looked into, all these outrageous stories are going to go away. You know what I mean? If you could ever track down who that phone call was made to, if it were real, and if somebody were called to pick her up or whatever, right? So yeah, that was this is the introduction of Mark Burns, not yet named in the podcast as Mr. X. I've been warned on numerous occasions to beware of people intentionally trying to send me down the wrong path in this case. Not a warning that people might give me faulty information because of fading memories or unsubstantiated rumors that they honestly believe, but actual disinformation. Well, this implies a conspiracy. And while I'm no conspiracy theorist, I took this to heart. That was an eerie warning to receive when you first come into this knowing nothing. It causes you to trust no one. So this episode is the elephant in the room that almost kept this podcast from ever happening. I'm Brandon Barnett, and this is Searching for Ghosts. Just 4 days after Cayce was reported missing, the Jackson Sun newspaper reported that after finding none of her belongings missing at the house, that police were treating this as an abduction. Cayce had reportedly been seen at the Gibson County Fair and at a Dyersburg, Tennessee Walmart. This is what led to the composite sketch mentioned in Episode 2, Valerie. In the August 28, 1996 edition of the Jackson Sun, Milan Police Lieutenant Jerry Hartsfield said that, quote, Cayce left with someone she knew and felt comfortable with. Now, we need to find out who that is, unquote. Then on September 15, 1996, the Jackson Sun did an interview with Cayce's mother, Cindy. The article begins, quote, Police believe that Cayce ran away. It's possible an unknown male is involved. Reports have been phoned in from across the U.S. describing Cayce with an older man, unquote. The article included a picture of Cayce with a caption asking if she was a runaway or a kidnap victim. So 1 month after she went missing, Cayce's disappearance was being looked at as this hybrid of a runaway and an abduction. That maybe she was lured away by someone she knew, or willingly left with someone initially, and that it turned into an abduction. Remember the headline mentioned in Episode 2, Valerie, from the October 1st, 1996 edition of the Milan Mirror Exchange?
About a world-famous search and rescue dog named Valerie, who came to Milan to search for Cayce. The headline read something like, Cayce left on her own free will, Smart Dog says. Her own free will?
Okay, this is the clip I kind of referenced earlier about the, man, I was being told that people were intentionally, the people who were, or some who were talking to me were intentionally sending me down the wrong path. And like I said, I needed somebody I could latch on to that I needed some kind of anchor for the trust factor, right? And it just makes you, again, I feel for the cops so much, because it just makes you, it was so, by this stage, it had become so cloak and dagger and spy movie kind of stuff, to where it was like, you can't trust anybody. That wasn't even her best friend at the time. That's disinformation. I mean, that takes a toll on you, when you're just trying to get to the truth, man, and you're trying to just hold this thing together, and you're trying so hard for it not to be topics, and there's only so much you can shield against that, because when they're coming at you from all sides and telling you, well, yeah, that person you put in that episode, you can't trust them, and this is why, and you're going, what is this? Like, what is going on? Anyway, in this clip too, we also get into the, just the month apart newspaper articles, where it's like, they're calling it a runaway in one and an abduction in the other. They're flip flopping, man, because, and God bless them. I know why, right? At this point, I'm starting to figure out why, because it's like, I wonder if these old boys got a straight answer back in the day, because, I don't know that I am, I mean, it's enough to make you just want to scream, and I wanted to put out a whole lecture series as an episode of just like, can anybody tell the truth? Like, and it sucks, man, because, again, it's one thing to be objective and going in there, but over the course of it, you expect to be able to trust people. And there were people, don't get me wrong. I trusted Don and K. Joe. And I've had enough things come through with them to where it wasn't a blind trust. You know what I mean? It was just, the facts bore it out, Not to say that they were right about everything. I mean, we're talking 20 years, people's recollections and what people are trying to do, But I don't know. It was just a weird. I've only worked on a couple of these, working on my third one, so I can't sit here and go, well, this is the weirdest case I've ever worked, because it was the first one I'd ever done. And I've only done one other one. And I'm starting on a third one, so I don't know, but I mean, this has to be one of the hardest cases, man, for law enforcement. It had to be. I mean, I think that's evidenced by the fact that it's 20 something years later, and we're just now hopefully getting to the truth, but, you didn't know which way to turn, man, it just immediately goes into conspiracy land from the get, it seems like.
The theories floating around concerning Cindy are disturbing. I've heard everything from this being retribution for a drug debt to there being a prostitution ring. These theories all have one thing in common, that it was Cindy who got in too deep with drugs, and this was a way for her to pay her debt. But as I stated in episode 4 of the letter, so many of these theories have taken on urban legend status. People repeat these stories as fact, but the problem is that with each person you talk to, you get a different version of a similar story. Many of them don't seem to connect. If there are similar stories with different perpetrators at different locations, they all can't be true. Until Cindy decides to speak to me, I only have what she has said in the past, and until recently, this has been next to nothing. But now I have the Jackson Sun articles from the time shortly after Cayce's disappearance, when she would talk to the press. Cindy in the Jackson Sun just 1 month after Cayce went missing. Quote, I am so guilty of not communicating with her. My dad was an alcoholic, and he always said, just do it. My mom had a hard time, and I was smacked around plenty.
I can't remember spanking Cayce but twice because I said my kids wouldn't live like that. But I don't know how to talk about things. Unquote. After being asked if she had seen any signs of rebellion in Cayce, Cindy said this, quote, I found out she smoked cigarettes. It just floored me. Unquote. This was the same article where Cindy had discovered that Cayce was talking to the 18-year-old that was facing federal charges in a McNairy County jail mentioned in the last episode. Fast forward to the 1-year anniversary of Cayce's disappearance, and the things that I was initially told by her peers were verified in the news reports. From Cayce's grandmother, Margaret Smith, quote, I just can't believe she ran away. But then, I didn't know she was sexually active either. The FBI asked me if I knew that. But she wasn't as close to me as she had been. I guess that goes with being a teenager. They said she was mingling with the wrong crowd and had gotten an older boyfriend. He got put in jail for something. Unquote. Later in the article, Cindy also cites receiving this information from law enforcement officials. Talking about Cindy, quote, she too found out from law officers that Cayce had a boyfriend who admitted he'd had sex with her for the first time 2 weeks before she vanished. Unquote. Cindy was also told by police that this boyfriend was not involved in her disappearance. And 1 year in, the rumors about Cindy's possible involvement were already circulating. From Cindy, quote, it's hard to swallow that some people think you killed your child and hid the body. I can relate to that guy accused in the Olympic bombing. Unquote. The Jackson Sun reports from the FBI confirm what I'd been hearing from Cayce's peers from day one. Without this confirmation, I don't know that I would have ever mentioned it. That's why I decided to use the audio of the reports I'd received about a change in Cayce around the time she went missing instead.
That's when I saw the change in Cayce's appearance during the summer before high school.
And I saw it too, because I got her on here on her birthday. You can kind of see how she was. She was younger, right. But still, she was still that little girl, right. You know. Something went on.
That was a way to point to the fact that there were different on-the-record accounts being told from people who knew Cayce. In the beginning, this was the only way I knew how to get the audience to at least consider that there might be another person or group of people who would be responsible for this that might not have any connection to Cindy. Because let's face it, Cindy is an easy target, and maybe deservedly so. But everyone involved is doing a disservice to Cayce by not telling the entire truth. It appears that it was someone who knew Cayce who is responsible for this. So you have to look at everyone who knew her, not just the ones associated with Cindy. But let me be clear, this information in no way lessens Cayce's innocence. The only reason this is relevant is that it possibly opens the door for more persons of interest, nothing else. Our culture and legal system have deemed that 14-year-olds do not possess the emotional maturity to make rational decisions regarding sex, but grown men do. The purpose of this episode is to do one thing, to force us to consider other possible motives and perpetrators responsible for this. Because for me at this point, it is just as plausible that Cindy was so distracted by her partying that she didn't realize the type of people pursuing her daughter. With the evidence currently available, that is just as possible as any drug or prostitution ring theory. We must stay objective until hard evidence leads us in a certain direction. And it could very well be that law enforcement officials already have such evidence. But until we know that for sure, we have to consider all possibilities. Okay, that was my final plea in the episode to try to drive the point home that, in no way am I saying that Cayce was responsible for anything that might have happened to her, right? And I think I made it pretty clear, but I mean, it's getting published in the reports. Family members are being surprised by the fact of certain things that, and obviously law enforcement was investigating this and coming back and telling the family this. Well, did you know that this guy here was, you know what I mean? Like, in the court of public opinion, Cindy had been lambasted and so had Mark Burns, right? And that didn't get him anywhere. And like I said, I was headed that way, right? Just hang on, guys. I'm coming, right? But let's look at all this other stuff that might have happened with any ne'er-do-wells that were in Cayce's circle that might have not had anything to do with Cindy. You know what I mean? Like, let's start there. And because the most information, if you call it that, most of the rumors were about Mark Burns. Pete Hill would show up every once in a while, and then Cindy was kind of interjected in those rumors in varying degrees, right? Cindy was always kind of a constant. Okay. Well, another thing too is, let's just say for the sake of argument, Cindy has nothing to do with this outside of maybe not being at the house when she should have been to prevent this from happening. Okay. She's already on guard. If she were innocent and she gets all these rumors thrown at her for 20 years. So when I was coming in, I was just like trying to give the impression. Well, it wasn't the impression. I mean, it was the fact. I was looking at every angle on this. So that was a welcome mat, I thought, to Cindy to say, like, hey, look, I'm going to be fair on this thing. And if you have nothing to hide, man, I'm going to be your best friend. You don't want to come out guns blazing on Cindy anyway, even from a strategic standpoint. If you want her to ever get on a microphone and tell her story, you know. So, again, 20 years later, we're doing a podcast. If there's any truth to any of these other rumors, everybody's yelling at me like, you got to get on this now. This is, well, I know this is what happened. And Cindy's involved. We'll get there. If there's any there, we'll, hopefully we'll find it. I'm not skirting it. It's just everything in its time, right? Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this. Please subscribe to the channel. It helps out a lot. Share this, listen, and I'll see you on the flip side for episode 6.